Hey guys, this is me Rabi here.
This is me Azurabireacts
You
here.
guys are back with another reaction video. तो guys अगर चैनल पर नहीं हो जल्दी से चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करके Azurabireacts ज्वाइन करो. व्लॉगिंग चैनल को भी जाके सब्सक्राइब करो, लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में है. चलते हैं आज की वीडियो की तरफ. टाइटल
तो गाइस आज हम इस वीडियो पे रिएक्शन देने वाले हैं. उसका टाइटल है व्हाई दिस ब्रिटिश एक्सपैट चोज इंडिया
फॉर
लाइफ. तो देखते हैं और सुनते हैं इनकी कहानी और एंजॉय करते हैं और फिर रिएक्शन देते हैं.
Opportunity to have a much better lifestyle here than you could in the UK.
Meet Jamie. Originally from the UK, he moved to Delhi almost 3 years ago. Jamie told me how living in India made him handle any level of spicy food, whether he's faced any prejudices for being British here, and what the biggest misconceptions our Westerners have about India. I'm Max, an entrepreneur and YouTuber based in Singapore. Let's dive in. Is there any misconception about India and the West?
Loads. One of the worst things that was ever produced about India, even though it wasn't a description about India and Indian culture, was Slumdog Millionaire, the film. So that painted India, and it just amplified the stereotype. People are poor, they live on the streets, they rob, they steal, all that kind of stuff. But actually, that happens in every society across the world. That isn't just in India. And actually, the food here is amazing. The people are amazing. There are some stunning places to go and visit here. I've been to Aurangabad, which is about 45 minutes, an hour, that's probably wrong, outside of Mumbai. And the caves that were built, that humongous caves, I've never seen anything quite like it. I didn't even know it existed until I got to India. And lots of people in India were like, oh, you went there. So there's lots to see here. And experience. And lots of people say, oh, you're either rich or poor in India. And I'm like, that isn't even, there's multitudes of level of society here. Much the same as there is elsewhere in the world. And that kind of stereotype that you're either rich or poor, it couldn't be further from the truth. Education is so important here because there's so many people here. So families will push the kids quite heavily to making sure they're getting good grades, like the top grades. They rank your class performance in the newspaper.
Oh,
that's how aggressive it can be, because you're challenging against 1.4 billion people here, and the universities only have so many places, and there are only so many good universities, and they want to send their kids to study in the States and in Canada. They need to get top marks, so there's a big pressure from that perspective. But yeah, I think people can assume from any kind of meteoric rise. Definitely.
have you ever felt this resentment towards you because you're from Britain and it's like a colony?
I think there's always, there's definitely, I've had experiences where people have been kind of a bit brutal about things I may have, I may post something about me going back to the UK or something, and then people will then say something. If things happening in the news, people might post stuff about Britain and the history. Most of the time when people talk about it, it's banter. And I wasn't here then, it wasn't me that did anything. That's all my defense is. The only thing I would say is I'm here now and I'm helping to contribute to the economy, and the country's amazing and I'm living here, so it can't be that bad.
Was it easy for you as a native English speaker, to understand locals, how they speak English?
Yeah, I think I'm better at understanding locals and drivers and people that come to the house and stuff. I think people struggle to understand me. And that is a big problem. And I've had that problem a little bit more since I've moved to Mumbai. I try and slow down, but I naturally don't talk that slowly. I tend to speak quite quickly. So I'm finding myself having to slow down quite a lot and kind of use less, not complicated, but less colloquial words and stuff. Don't use those words. And just simplify everything I'm trying to say. And my accent, some people go, your accent's so difficult to understand. And other people are like, oh no, your accent's fine. So I try to learn Hindi, but it is difficult to learn. The sentence construction is different to the UK. The way that sentence is constructed is complete opposite to the UK. And therefore, when you're trying to speak Hindi, my brain is trying to rework which way around to say the sentence. It's very difficult. And therefore, when the locals will say English, they're doing it in the same way as they speak Hindi. And therefore, when it comes out, it seems like the sentence is backwards, but that's the way they speak in Hindi. So that's fine. But you kind of get the drift. But I end up kind of also when I write emails and stuff, I'm using the same kind of grammar in my emails. So I make it easier for people to understand. And also it just happens. You do just end up merging into the environment that you live in. When you hear people talk like that, that's how you end up talking yourself.
What's the biggest difference for you between living in London, living in Delhi?
I think the amount of food is a massive thing in India. Everything revolves around food. They say that food changes every 10 kilometers and dialect changes every 20 kilometers, which is definitely true, having traveled a bit. But yeah, the food is very different. I think, I always liked spicy food before I came here. Now I can take anything. My spice level's gone through the roof. When I go back to the UK, I struggle with food because it's so bland in comparison.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
What's your favorite food?
Butter chicken would be, if I was on a bad day, I was like, that's my go-to. Breakfast, even now, I would say masala dosa. So, and when I go back to the UK, I'm a bit struggling for what to eat, because I can't get a masala dosa.
Yeah.
I kind of get into it. And then I've always had a sweet tooth, and being in India, there's lots of sweets everywhere here. So yeah, gulab jamun, which is like Indian rice pudding, soaked in syrup, soaked in loads of E numbers, is awesome, but so bad for you.
Is there actually like the big chance to have like diarrhea or stomach problems if you're not prepared for local food?
So I think, touch wood, I've not had loads of problems, but I think it's not necessarily because of hygiene or anything like that as to why people end up with an
That's what
upset
people
stomach.
say.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think it's the change of spice level. So there's a lot of flavour that goes into foods, whereas in the UK, you have salt and pepper and that's about it. But in Indian food, there is a ton of herbs and spices that go into a food, and any one of those can then knock your stomach out. And it's not to say the food hasn't been cooked. Like, some of the best food and some of the healthiest food is on the street, because it's cooked to 1 inch of its life. It's cooking and cooking and cooking. There's nothing wrong with it. I also think the humidity, that heat, can also have an impact. If you get really, really hot and you're just continually hot, that can also have an impact. But in most restaurants, the restaurants are amazing. Hygiene, there's no problem with hygiene at all. You just need to be careful if you're going to eat street food, which street food places you go. If you want to eat street food, go to the place with the biggest queue. So don't go to a street food place if there's no one there. If there's loads of locals there, go there.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest business in India are street food sellers. They make an absolute fortune. There is a famous guy, I don't want to say who he is, but there's a famous guy in South Delhi who runs a set of network of street food sellers. He has one of the biggest houses in South Delhi.
Are there anything that you're still not used to living in India?
So I think moving to Mumbai, traffic's bad. Traffic was bad in Delhi, but you kind of got used to it. Like, if the journey was an hour, you'd know it'd be an hour, and it would take an hour. Here, I've only been in Mumbai for like 6 weeks, but the traffic, even short distances, like 2 kilometers, can take you half an hour. And the kind of like Google Maps will just keep extending the time, and you're like, oh, this is taking absolutely ages. I had a moment 2 weeks ago where I just got out and walked because the cars just weren't moving. So the traffic is pretty bad here, I have to say. I think my biggest shock coming was the weather. Yes, it's hot, but how hot it gets and for how long. I still get people when I go back to the UK, they say, oh, you haven't got a tan. Why haven't you tanned? It's like 40 degrees every day. Yeah, living in 40 degrees means that you want to escape from the sun.
Yeah.
You don't want to be sunbathing in it, So from especially in Delhi, where it's a lot hotter than Mumbai, April and May, between 12 and 6 o'clock, nobody really goes out. It gets 40 plus degrees. There were times when it almost hit 50. When it hits 50, they shut the airport because they can't guarantee the tarmac in the heat. And it's searingly hot. And that's what Delhi's kind of known for. But on the plus side, in the winter, it has a very, very nice winter. Well, for me it does. For lots of the locals, it was freezing for them. But for me, it was like 15 degrees. I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And you could just go out and walk around. One of the challenges when it's so hot is you can't go out. Like, walking is always a little bit difficult in India. The pavements aren't really built for walking.
Yeah.
And especially where I lived in Delhi, there wasn't loads of places to go and walk. But because it's so hot, you don't walk. And when I used to live in London, you'd go out and walk around everywhere. You'd walk from place to place. And when it's so hot, you can't do that. So the winter made it possible to then go out and explore India.
In the UK, you basically walk or you cycle also.
Yeah, I mean,
here
lots of
people
cycle.
don't cycle, I guess.
Yeah, but here it'd be dangerous to cycle on the roads.
You'll be killed on the road, probably, yeah. What's the 3 best things for you about living in Delhi?
The social part of it is amazing. Like, there's a restaurant opening up every day, there's bars opening up, there's a party everywhere. So the social aspect, the ability to play sport is actually quite good. I played cricket. There's lots of cricket pitches in Delhi, so that's pretty cool. And then the food. You can get any kind of cuisine you want in Delhi. It's kind of the food, I'd say, pretty big for food. I think here, from an expat perspective, living here that's different to the UK, like, the expat world is very welcoming. And I think wherever you go, like Delhi and Mumbai are the 2 places I've only ever lived. Everyone's very welcoming. Everyone wants to know your story. Where have you come from? Why are you in India? What are you doing? Should we go out for a drink on Saturday? And that's kind of a far more sociable. As I think the UK, not to say anything disparaging about the UK, but people have their lives, they have their network, and that's it. When I first moved here, England were playing cricket in India, and I wanted to go and watch the cricket. So I messaged the Instagram Barmy Army fan page. They told me of a guy that was living in India and living in Delhi. So I messaged him. He was like, oh yeah, here's the WhatsApp group for tickets. Are you now living here? I was like, yeah. He was like, oh, I run an expat cricket club. Do you want to do you play cricket? And I was like, yeah, I played cricket like 20 years ago. So yeah, I can play-ish. He said, well, I'm having a party for my birthday on Saturday. Do you want to come along and meet the guys? So I was like, oh God, yeah, okay, fine. So at 40 years of age, I went to a birthday party with a crate of beer, not knowing a soul. And that was kind of like the first thing that led me to like a network in India. And that was really cool. And it's one of the things I always say to people now that they come and live here, and just to expats generally, is the first 6 months you arrive, say yes to every single invitation you get, which I'm sure you used to. You know, don't say no, and you know, 60% of them, 70% of them might be absolute rubbish. But you know, don't necessarily need that many people in your life. Anyone, I certainly don't. And you might find a network. And that was one of the big things that I did very early on, and then opened up the network in India.
In Singapore, there is this problem, kind of, that you start feeling after you've been in the country for like 3, 4, 5 years. Some people there for assignment, so you make friends with someone, and then after 3 years, he's gone to another place or back home.
True.
And then you're like, okay, why invested so much time and effort like making friends?
So I definitely agree with that. So I had that probably, so I was, the first 2 years I was in Delhi, it was kind of post-COVID, so people hadn't really moved out and people were kind of still locked in Delhi, so to speak. And then slowly people started to move out. And yes, it is difficult because you make very close connections with people and then they go. And then you have to start again. And sometimes you're like, oh, can I really be bothered? And certainly like moving to Mumbai, I was like, you know what, I could just fly back to Delhi. It's an hour and a half on a plane. I don't really need to make a network here, but you do need to make a network wherever you go. But the cool thing about that is I now have a network across the world. So I've got friends in Australia, Brazil, South Africa, parts of Europe that I didn't have before. So you've kind of built this network across the world. That's pretty cool. That is a transient life and you have to get used to that.
Yeah.
People will come and go. But the good thing is people are always still coming.
Sometimes that's the case in Singapore, sometimes, not always. Like foreigners stick together and like locals stick together.
I don't necessarily think it's classified by whether you're an expat or whether you're local. I think it's about what you like, what your interests are. Do I have anything in common with you? Do I want to go out and have a drink with you? Can we chat about anything? And if you can't, then you don't socialise. And therefore you don't mix. And that's why I think the groups just, if you've only ever lived in India and you haven't necessarily travelled that far, you don't expose yourself to kind of like Western culture, then it's difficult. It's going to be a bit harder for us to have a conversation and get into, because we don't really have that much in common, which is no different to, I think, if you lived in the UK and I was talking to somebody that didn't have anything in common with me, I wouldn't be a friend with them. But yeah, I mean, I think you do need expat friends in some ways. I had, when I first landed here, 3 weeks in, the company got us like an orientation guide and he would like tell you what India's like and stuff. And one of the things he said is you need expat friends because you're going to need that avenue where you can just talk about what happened in the football, what's happening in the news back home. Can you see the terrible weather? Because you've got to talk about the weather because obviously we're British, you've got to talk about the weather to somebody. You know, you need that kind of release thing. Yeah, I think you just get along with people that you like or don't like. I wouldn't necessarily classify it as local or not local.
Do you think you obtained any like new habits living in India for 2.5 years?
You get used to some of the benefits of living in India. You know, I have a housekeeper. Most people have home help of some kind. So when you come home at the end of the day, everything is done around the house and you haven't got to do that, which then gives you opportunity to do other things. If you've got kids, then it's a godsend.
Yeah, I heard it's a big thing in India.
Yeah, everyone. So I think in all levels of society, no matter kind of where you are in the social structure, they will have some kind of home help, either if it's just somebody come in and clean, sweep, someone to do the dishes. Lots of Indian families, the mothers will still want to cook. So they still won't let, you know, I will let my housekeeper, she can cook. Lots of people won't let them cook and they want to cook themselves. So they'll maybe chop vegetables, do that kind of stuff, clean the dishes, clean the house, but they'll still cook. And it's all levels within India.
I talked to my buddy, he's Singaporean, he became Singaporean recently, so he's from India. I told him like, oh, in Singapore is so nice because you have this domestic helper, so life is much easier. So we never go back to Europe because there is no such an option. And he's like, oh, I thought it's like everywhere in the world like that, because in India we have like 5 helpers. When I was growing up, it was like 5 helpers.
So I've got friends here, and they've got kids. 2 kids under like 5 and got 2 nannies, maids. They're not going back to the UK.
What's the, let's say, overall typical foreigner monthly budget?
Oh God.
Something like that. Or the
Someone's going to tell me I should save more money. If you were to go out for dinner in India and you go to a very nice restaurant, I would say you would struggle to pay more than £10 for a main course. If you're paying more than £10 for a main course, you would be raising your eyebrows at that. One of the best restaurants in India, in Delhi, there's one just opening in Mumbai, Michelin, I think it's one Michelin star restaurant, does a 7-course tasting menu for £49.
This is crazy.
You wouldn't get like half of that.
Yeah.
You'd get like 2 main courses in the UK maybe for that. Michelin star maybe
I know.
not.
In,
So,
in Singapore, it would be 10 times actually.
Oh,
it would
so
be
yeah,
500
so,
SGD.
yeah.
Oh,
Um,
okay, 7
and then
times.
depending on where you live, so alcohol, I mean, I don't really drink that much anymore. PT, listen to that. But alcohol, depending on where you are, can be quite expensive. Anything that's imported generally is more expensive. So our wine, you'll pay 12 to 15 pounds for a bottle of Jacob's Creek, which many people would say that's 12 pounds, 15 pounds too much. But spirits can be a lot cheaper, especially like North India, where I was, alcohol was relatively cheap. And in some cases, very, very cheap. As you come further south, it tends to get a little bit more expensive. Certainly here, it's a lot more expensive than it was in Delhi. Your biggest bill in the house, apart from maybe rent, depending on whether you're paying rent or not, electricity, obviously ACs are on quite a lot of the time. Anywhere between maybe £100 to £120 in the peak months, depending on how much you put on, which is way less than the UK.
What would be the price of, let's say, 1-bedroom apartment in a nice area in Mumbai or Delhi?
1 bedroom you could probably get in a kind of like expat area would be maybe like £800 a month, maybe slightly less than that, depending on the standards and stuff. But yeah, in Delhi, I used to live just outside Delhi, but you'd pay close to £2,000, but you'd be 4,000 square foot apartment, gym, restaurant, bar, salon, spa, 2 swimming pools, lots of space. In Mumbai, you just lose the space because it's so tight for space here. So you pay kind of similar money, but you'd be half the size.
Do you think is something that, let's say, UK can learn from India?
A couple of things. Like I think there's a view in the West that the East is trying to mimic the West. Yeah, and in certain instances that might be the case. But there are certain instances where the East has the right thing going on and the West doesn't realise. From a cost perspective, there's a lot of people here, so things are a lot cheaper because people tend to be cheaper here. So there's lots of opportunity to have a much better lifestyle here than you could in the UK. I have a personal trainer, costs the equivalent of £10 an hour. In the UK that'd be 40, 50 pounds. You can have home help here. I can get deliveries for shopping, groceries, within 15 minutes. I don't have to book a slot. I don't have to be in. I don't have to spend a minimum of £50 to get the booking, to get the slot like a supermarket does in the UK. So there are certain things that are coming. There's some payment modules here. The UK, there is Apple Pay. Here there's Paytm, means I can pay a street seller with my card. That's awesome. So there's lots of things, I think, small things that I think the West could learn. I also think the family is so important here. Lots of things revolve around the family and how important that is. Food, as I talked about, is an integral part of kind of like Indian culture. You talk about food and Britain and people kind of like, just move on. What is that? What is Indian? What is English food? So that's a big part of society and very, very important. And I think maybe the West has kind of lost its view on where the family is and the dynamic of it.
So guys, this was a video why this British expat choose India for life. और उन्होंने बताया भी है, इसकी रीजंस भी बताई हैं कि मुझे तो बड़ी मजे की वीडियो लगी है, बड़ी इन्फॉर्मेटिव थी और उनकी बहुत अच्छी बातें बताई उन्होंने कहा कि मेन चीज़ तो है कि मेरा फैमिली कल्चर बहुत ज़्यादा इधर है जो कि बाहर नहीं होता है, क्योंकि यहाँ पे फैमिली एक बॉन्ड की जो बॉन्ड होता है उनका बहुत अच्छा होता है, वो एक मिलके रहते हैं। एक तो ये है, ऊपर से फिर उनकी अपनी एक चॉइस है, बंदे की भी चॉइस होती है। एक तो उन्होंने हाउस हेल्प की बात की कि यहाँ पर हाउस हेल्प मिलती है, बाहर हाउस हेल्प नहीं होती है, जो आप यूरोप में या पे बाकी कंट्रीज़ में, बड़े कंट्रीज़ में नहीं होती है, दुबई वगैरह में होती है, आप डोमेस्टिक दे सकते हैं। तो इस तरह की चीज़ें। और उन्होंने वेदर का बताया, कहते हैं कि जैसे कि इंडिया में लोग, जैसे गर्मी तो ऑब्वियसली जब 40-50 डिग्री पड़ता है तो हमारे लिए कहता है बड़ा मुश्किल होता है मेरे लिए जाना बाहर, जैसे इंडिया के लोग भी नहीं निकलते होंगे, हम भी नहीं निकलते बाहर। लेकिन जब सर्दी होती है तो 15-20 डिग्री होती है, जब 15 डिग्री होगा, 10 डिग्री होगा, तो बाकी लोगों के लिए जो इंडियंस होते हैं जो होते हैं उनके लिए वो फ्रीजिंग कोल्ड होता है। कहते हैं मेरे लिए होता है, कहते हैं वाओ व्हाट अ गुड वेदर, तो उनके लिए वो वेदर बहुत अच्छा होता है, बिकॉज वो उनके बॉडी अडेप्टेबिलिटी जो है वो हो चुकी हुई है ठंड की बहुत ज़्यादा, तो उनके लिए है। और बाकी उन्होंने हर तरह की चीज़ें बताई हैं कि एक प्रॉज भी बताए हैं कि प्रॉज बहुत ज़्यादा हैं, कॉन्स भी बताए हैं कि जैसे मुंबई में रहते हैं तो वहाँ पर ट्रैफिक का बहुत मसला है कि वहाँ पर अगर 2 किलोमीटर की जो राइड भी होती है तो भी हाफ एन आवर से ज़्यादा या हाफ एन आवर लग जाता है। और ये बताया उन्होंने, इस तरह की चीज़ें उन्होंने बहुत सी बताई हैं कि बहुत मज़े की जो चीज़, जो मुझे कि बड़ी इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो थी और बड़ा मज़े का अच्छा लगा, क्योंकि उन्होंने इंडिया को चूज़ किया क्योंकि उनको वहाँ पर उन्होंने कहा कि उनके फूड बहुत अच्छा है और एक तो चीपर भी है, क्योंकि इंडिया इज़ चीपर दैन मेनी द कंट्रीज़, बिकॉज वहाँ पर खाना कहना बहुत सस्ता है वो। और उन्होंने कंपैरिजन के बताया भी कि जैसे बिजली का बिल जो उधर आता है यूके में और इधर आता है तो यहाँ पर कम है। और यहाँ पे उन्होंने ये कहा कि जब मैं बंदा आता है तो बंदा जो अगर आप नए आते हो यहाँ पे शिफ्ट होता है बंदा कोई फॉरेनर, तो वो जो कोई भी आपकी किसी जगह पार्टी पे या किसी कोई इन्विटेशन तो आपको जाना चाहिए ताकि आपके रिलेशनशिप बने, आपके दोस्तियाँ हों, आपकी फ्रेंडशिप बने, ताकि आगे ऑब्वियसली आपके अकेला बंदा तो ज़िंदगी नहीं गुजार सकता, तो दोस्तों का और जानने वालों का आपका रिलेशनशिप बनना चाहिए ताकि अगर रिलेशनशिप बनेगा तो कभी खुदा ना खास्ता कोई मसला हो जाता है, कोई भी इशू होता है या वैसे कि आप लो फील करते हो तो आप अपने दोस्तों के पास या किसी के पास जा सकते हो। तो ये एक अच्छी बात उन्होंने बताई, मतलब कि बहुत मज़ा आया। और खाने का बहुत लगा कि खाना जो है यहाँ पर जो पैसे कमाते हैं खाने वाले बहुत ज़्यादा कमाते हैं, बिकॉज उन्होंने कहा कि एक ऐसा बंदा भी है दिल्ली के अंदर जिसकी जो स्ट्रीट फूड सेल करता है, उसने मल्टीपल स्ट्रीट फूड स्टॉल्स लगाए हुए और वो बहुत महंगा घर ओन करता है साउथ दिल्ली में। तो इस तरह की बातें उन्होंने बहुत ज़्यादा बताई हैं। तो मेरा तो यही टेक है कि उनको पसंद आया इंडिया, बिकॉज इंडिया डिजर्व करता है कि वो पसंद किया जाए, क्योंकि उन्होंने हर तरह की फैसिलिटी और इंडिया कल्चर सिटी भी है। उन्होंने कहा मैं कल्चर को देखा मैंने कि इतना खूबसूरत कल्चर है, वो डिफरेंट ओल्ड हिस्टोरिकल प्लेसेस में भी गए तो उन्हें बहुत पसंद आया, जैसे कि हमें मुझे बहुत पसंद आता है इस तरह की चीज़ें, तो इसलिए उन्होंने चूज़ किया इंडिया को।
जो वीडियो के अंदर बताया वो यही बता रहे थे, उनको एक चीज़ लाइक वो पूछ रहे थे ना कि आपको क्या मुश्किलात पेश आए, तो उन्होंने बोला कि लैंग्वेज का एक बैरियर है। हालांकि इंग्लिश बोलने वहाँ पर सबको आती है, लेकिन जिस तरह से एक फॉरेनर इंग्लिश बोलते हैं बहुत स्पीड में, तो उस तरह से हम एशियंस जो है वो उतनी स्पीड में और उस एक्सेंट में नहीं बोल पाते। तो हमें समझ तो आती है बट व्हेन दे स्पीक सो फास्टली तो वो आपको एक बैरियर आता है।
क्या अगर हम जैसे मतलब कि अगर एक पढ़ा लिखा तबका हो तो वो तो बात कर लेगा, लेकिन जो ऑब्वियसली आपने बाहर जाना है, हाँ आपने अपने स्ट्रीट फूड लेने जाना है कहीं पे, वो खड़ा उसको इंग्लिश ना आती है बिकॉज तो पढ़ा नहीं होगा, तो वो उनका ज़रा बैरियर होता है। वो कहते हैं मुझे इंग्लिश समझ तो आ मुझे उनकी लैंग्वेज समझ तो आ जाती है लेकिन मुझे बोलना नहीं आता हिंदी, क्योंकि वो कहता है कि हमारा ऑपोजिट चलता है, बैकवर्ड पे चलता है ना।
लेकिन इंडिया में मोस्टली लोगों को इंग्लिश बोलने आती है, बट ड्यू टू एक्सेंट समटाइम्स कुछ लोग होते हैं उनको नहीं समझ आती कि आप क्या बोल रहे, तो वहाँ पे थोड़ा बहुत इशू आ सकता है लेकिन ज़्यादा नहीं होता होगा। और बाकी जो उन्होंने बताया है कि वो यहाँ पर क्यों रहना पसंद करते हैं, वो उनका मेन जो मैंने अभी तक वीडियो में ऑब्जर्व किया वो ये था कि उनको यहाँ पर जो चीपर पड़ रहा है, इंडिया चीपर है एज कम्पेयर टू यूके, और यहाँ पर फैसिलिटीज़ ज़्यादा है। आपको यूके में उस तरह की फैसिलिटीज़ नहीं मिलेंगी जो कि आपको इंडिया में मिल सकती हैं।
और भी ऑप्शंस थी, वो और कंट्री भी जा दुबई जा सकते थे, दुबई भी उससे तो चीपर ही है यूके से।
नहीं, इंडिया ज़्यादा चीपर है।
इंडिया तो बहुत चीपर है उस कि उन्होंने मेरे ख्याल से उन्होंने कल्चर और इस तरह का अपना
फैसिलिटीज की बात की है उन्होंने और कल्चर की बात की है। वो तो कल्चर तो हो गई लेकिन फैसिलिटीज उनके पास यहाँ पर ज्यादा है। यहाँ पर
यूके में ज्यादा है कि चीपर पड़ता है, ये आप कह सकते हो फैसिलिटी यूके में कम होगी क्या?
यहाँ पर फैसिलिटीज ज्यादा है। यूके के अंदर आपको स्पेशल हाउस हेल्प नहीं मिल सकती, मेड स्टार्टर नहीं मिल सकती है। यहाँ पर आप अफोर्ड कर सकते हैं, अगर आप अच्छा कमा रहे हैं आप 4 नौकर भी रख सकते हैं, आप यहाँ पर अलग खाना बनाने वाली भी रख सकते हैं, आपको हर चीज के लिए कोई ना कोई मेड मिल जाएगी। वहां पर आपको हर चीज के लिए मेड तो नहीं मिलेगी ना। तो ये पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से कह रही हूँ कि ये फैसिलिटीज में आ जाती है बात। जैसे कि वो ट्रेनर है, ट्रेनर भी यहाँ पर मैं अपना पर्सनल ट्रेनर हायर कर सकता हूँ, रखा हुआ है मैंने, वहां पर मैं रखूंगा।
वो पैसे चार्ज करते हैं बस, ये पैसे का
यही मैं भी बोल रही हूँ, चीपर पड़ता है ना, और क्या मैं बोल रही हूँ, व्हाई नॉट गेटिंग। यहाँ पे फैसिलिटीज उनको बहुत कम पैसों में भी मिल रही हैं और आप हर तरह की आपको लाइक ड्राइवर अगर आप चाहते हो आप वो भी अपने लिए रख सकते हैं पर्सनल। अगर हम किसी भी फॉरेन कंट्रीज में अगर पाकिस्तानीज या फिर अगर बात की एशियंस भी जाते हैं तो वहां जाकर हमें बहुत सारी चीज़ों पे कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ करना पड़ता है, क्योंकि हम लोग यहाँ पर आदत हो चुकी होती है हर चीज़ के लिए कोई ना कोई हेल्प की, और वहां पर आपको हर चीज़ अब खुद करनी पड़ती है तो फिर आप लोगों के लिए थोड़ा मुश्किल होता है। तो उनको एक ये चीज़ बहुत अपील और अट्रैक्टिव लगी है। दूसरा उन्होंने फूड की बात की, क्योंकि उनको फूड बहुत ज़्यादा पसंद आया, क्योंकि यहाँ इंडिया में तो फूड जो वैरायटी है हर स्टेप के ऊपर आपको नए से नए कुजीन्स मिल जाते हैं, नई से नई चीज़ खाने को मिल जाती है। वो एक बहुत ही अच्छी चीज़ है जो कि पूरी दुनिया के अंदर मशहूर है। और कल्चर की बात की जाए तो यहाँ पे कल्चर बहुत अच्छा है। और दूसरा कि फैमिली सिस्टम यहाँ पर बहुत ज़्यादा है, क्योंकि वेस्ट के अंदर ना ये फैमिली सिस्टम को इतनी इंपॉर्टेंस नहीं देते। वहाँ पे थोड़ा सा जब बच्चा 18 ईयर्स का होता है 16 ईयर्स का होता है तो वो अलहदा हो जाते हैं एंड दे स्टार्ट लिविंग अलोन। लेकिन हमारे यहाँ एशिया में स्पेशली ये एक फैमिली कल्चर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बहुत वैल्यू दिया जाता है पेरेंट्स को कि इकट्ठे रहना है, जॉइंट फैमिली सिस्टम होता है। वहाँ पर वो वाले कल्चर्स नहीं है, वहाँ पर अपनी जिंदगी को जीने का ज्यादा ट्रेंड है रादर देन कि आप इकट्ठे मिलकर रहें। वहाँ पे कहते हैं कि बड़े हो गए चले अब अपनी लाइफ अलग अलग जिए, अपना खुद ब खुद करें। तो वहाँ पर वो चीज़ वो मिस आउट करते हैं जो वेस्ट कुछ लोग होते हैं मिस आउट करते हैं, कुछ लोग जो आदी हैं वो तो ज़्यादा नहीं करते होंगे। तो मुझे लगा उनको ये सारी ओवरऑल एक पैकेज लगा टू लिव इन इंडिया, तो वो यहाँ पर रह रहे हैं। एंड यही था हमारा टेक ऑन दिस वीडियो एंड रिएक्शन ऑन दिस वीडियो। आई होप सो कि आप लोगों ने भी वीडियो को एंजॉय किया होगा, रिएक्शन को एंजॉय किया होगा। अगर किया है तो लाइक शेयर सब्सक्राइब करना। मुलाकात करेंगे एक और वीडियो में।
तो अब तुम्हारा क्या टेक है इस पे?
यही जो तुम्हारा टेक